Well, greetings everyone, and welcome to another episode of our WC Influencer podcast. Actually, it's a live podcast. I certainly hope. Helen, I got all the right codes in the right places, and I've turned on the right buttons. But I'm going to check real quickly here to make sure that I got everything. Yep, we're here. I think it's going to work. I'm, I'm
Perfect.
actually I'm actually so proud of myself. But I'm even more happy to have you on as a guest again today.
Well, thank you. It's so great to see you. You look very dapper today.
Well, we're just I just have my bow tie. I have my bow tie on today because I think the last time we did this, my beard was like down to the bottom.
Right? You couldn't see the bow tie.
I can see the bow tie. Goodness. So how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Busy, but very good.
And the Heart of Hospice podcast is just being downloaded all over the place. I think you're going to have like 13,000 downloads this
Looks
month. That's
looks
pretty
like it.
amazing.
Looks like it. We are busting at the seams, which is a wonderful, wonderful thing. Part of that is because we belong to the whole care network, and all of these connections are really, really working for us.
I love those shameless plugs, but no, but
That was pretty
but
bad, wasn't it?
but when we've talked a lot about this offline, but it seems like we've known each other for like forever.
Yes. Old friends.
Old friends have interest in similar topics, and as I'm sure most of my listeners know over the years, hospice has always been near and dear to me. Uh, I'll never forget my year of CPE and in the hospice. That was quite an experience in
Sure.
and of itself. For our listeners and viewers, CPE is clinical pastoral education, but and then connecting with you with your fabulous podcast, it's just like a perfect fit.
It is. And thank you for being so generous about the podcast. It's a labor of love, but it's such good work.
It is, and I think one of the things, and we're going to get into a variety of topics today, especially your new Hospice Navigation Services. I'm just so excited to talk to you about that. But I wanted to ask you just right off the top of my head. I think I know the answer to this, but what do you think is the most misunderstood topic or concern people have about hospice?
In broad terms, I think it's a fear that the patient and the family lose control over everything, over the care that's provided, over the medications that are given, over how they spend their time, what doctors they see. I think in a broad sense, it's about that fear. It's a fear of loss of control.
A fear of loss of control. Yeah.
Yes. As if death isn't scary enough.
But death doesn't have to be scary.
No, it doesn't. And that's part of what hospice teams and end of life workers are there for,
Mm-hmm.
to reduce the fear. Barbara Carnes says knowledge reduces fear. She's an end of life educator and advocate, has been for years.
Right.
And it's absolutely true. Once you know, you get comfortable.
Right. And knowledge is powerful. And this is an area that unfortunately people don't brush up on until they're right in the midst of an emergency.
Right. Most people, they take a crash course in it because we
They
don't talk about
they
it early enough.
they take a crash course right when they're in the middle of making a decision about it, sir.
Exactly. They already have the new car. They're sitting in it with the user's manual open in front of them, right? Because we don't talk about it early enough. We don't educate ourselves, and the healthcare
Right.
system is part of that. Our upstream conversations don't happen when
Right.
they should.
Right. And using that new car metaphor, just because you sign up and get that new car doesn't mean it's going to go out of service the next day.
Right. But once you drive it off the lot, it's yours.
It's yours. Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Because there's that misnomer or misunderstanding that once you're sign up for hospice or you're on hospice, that the end is imminent, and for some situations that is true, but for others, it really isn't. But, hospice is an experience for not only the person who is enrolled, but the entire family caregiving unit.
Exactly. Exactly. And upstream conversations help to offset those late referrals where people come to us too late.
Right.
I've had so many patients and families say, I wish we had known about this sooner.
Right. Yeah,
And
because
it's heartbreaking.
it is. These are plans that people avoid making, but I haven't. I think we're all going to experience it sooner or later. So why not?
Right.
I mean, I don't want to let the secret out of the bag, but
But here's a hint: 100% of people listening to this show and 100% of people speaking on this show will die.
right. And I think, and one of the many reasons you and I've connected is because we want to be able to share our experiences and help people in these emotional decision-making processes that they may not be familiar with. And that's why the heart of hospice really touches my heart. And then you've identified ways people who are unfamiliar with the system, how they can receive some help with your new navigation services. So let's dig into the hospice navigation services, because I think this is brilliant.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. That's a nice compliment. I'm not sure brilliant is the right word, but I think necessary and needed are definitely good description of the navigation services and why we're doing it. Um, it all goes back to, I wish we had known about this sooner.
If I could have had a V8.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So the navigation services, the concept is based on the fact that people need unbiased, accurate information that comes from experts in the end of life field, in the hospice
Right.
field, to be able to make good, informed, comfortable decisions for their end of life care. And that's the goal at the Hospice Navigation Services, is to provide that guidance, that somebody to provide expert information, somebody to provide reassurance, to provide answers to questions, and to squash those myths that we always have to deal with.
Oh, goodness.
Oh my gosh, yes.
There are a lot of myths out there, aren't there?
Oh, and some of them are crazy. Some of them are outdated,
Right.
valid things based on practices that were done 50 years ago that maybe someone saw done with a parent or grandparent that we no longer do because we've learned this
We've
isn't the
learned
best
so
way to
much.
serve. Right. This isn't
Right.
the best way to serve our patients.
Because in the relative scheme of things, hospice is a new program
Yes. When it comes to healthcare
when it
in
comes to
general.
healthcare. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's evolved over the years, even, in the last 10 years since Richard was, Richard decided to go into hospice. And I want to emphasize that Richard decided to go into hospice. I didn't make that decision for him. He had told me what he had wanted. So that's another component, I think, that is so important, as what your care partner really wants at this time of life.
Right. It's all about the patient's autonomy and
Mm-hmm.
what they consider quality of life. For some people, embracing end of life care, being on hospice, that's not quality of life, and they don't
Right.
want to sit in that space. And that's fine. The patient always gets to decide what is quality of life. But for so many people, hospice care can support everything they want to do, and it adds in. Hospice never takes the place of family. I've always taught my patients and their caregivers that hospice never takes the place of family. That's not our
Mm-hmm.
role. We're here to
Right.
supplement, to round out the circle of care,
Mm-hmm.
and place the patient at the center of everything.
And that's what it's supposed to be about.
It is. I'm not saying we're perfect.
Right. Well, there's
medical
nothing.
workers we're human.
It is a science.
It is. And
And we're learning
it's
something new
portable.
every day. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we should. Wouldn't you
Right.
want it to evolve? You wouldn't want to have the same kind of hospice care that they started with 50 years ago.
Very much so.
Although it has
Very.
changed, obviously,
Hmm.
death care in the United States has become very medicalized. And what I think we're doing now is unlearning some of these things.
Right.
People don't want to die in the hospital. They want to die at home for the most part.
When
For the
it's
most
safe,
part.
yes. Yeah. Very
Yes,
much so.
when it's safe and comfortable and they feel that it's appropriate,
Yeah.
that's what they want to do. It's not practical for everybody,
Right.
but we try to honor those wishes. But what we've learned is the machines and the tubes and the plasticky beds and the crunchy pillows and the bed rails and all the apparatus that we try to force in to a body that naturally knows how to shut itself down. Most of the time, those things become barriers between the patient, the person who's
Right.
dying, and the
Mm-hmm.
people who care about them.
Goodness, I love just having this conversation with you, and as I think about where the Hospice Navigation Services is going to go, I'm thinking about all the comfort that's going to be provided to people who are in the midst of an emotional decision, not sure where to turn to, and now they can access a trusted voice that is experienced. So, talk about your thought process in putting this together and why this is so important to you.
Well, we know that when people need to make decisions about end of life care for themselves or someone they care about,
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes they're fearful, exhausted, maybe
Right.
struggling financially, emotionally,
Right.
a lot of mental overwhelm. They may be exhausted if they're caregiving. They may also be
Very
making,
much so. Yes.
absolutely. So, a lot of people who are caregivers for someone who is moving towards end of life, say someone with dementia or Alzheimer's, they've been doing this for years. And little by little, the care is increased and it snowballs until they
Right.
realize I'm a full time caregiver. And
Right.
it's somewhere between 60 and 65% of those folks actually have a full time job outside their caregiving responsibilities. So you've got somebody trying to handle so much at once.
So balancing. Yeah. A
Yes,
lot of those folks are raising kids too.
exactly. They're sandwich caregivers, caring for
Right.
parents or even a spouse and caring for children at the same time. And
Right.
so you take all of that, and then they tell you, make this incredibly intense, important, impactful decision about someone you really care about. That's crazy. That is crazy. So, our intent with the navigation services is to provide support, education, a chance to ask questions, a chance to vent a little bit,
Right.
a chance to talk to somebody who not only has been caring for patients professionally, but also who has had a personal hospice experience. So I know what it's like to be on both sides, receiving the care and providing the care, which I think is an important perspective.
It's a very important perspective because while you're a healthcare professional, you've been in nursing and hospice for 30 years. I've heard you say 30 years.
Nursing for 30 years and hospice for almost 14.
But you also have a personal life too. You also have parents, and you've gone through this on a personal level, and it's different.
It is, and it
But you
should
can
be.
take those two different experiences and be able to create the Hospice Navigation Services, which is going to be helping so many people.
I think that having a personal experience gave me perspective that's so valuable. I understand when someone questions or has a concern about something, where that's coming from. It's
Yeah.
valid. It's absolutely valid. And as a nurse working at the bedside, there were times when I said, "Oh, you don't need to worry about that." It's dismissive. It's invalidating.
Right.
And we don't get to decide what someone else gets to worry about, what they choose to worry about. Well, that's a good statement, isn't it?
That is a good statement. Our caregiving capes are limited. So
Absolutely. And I think we also have some arrogance in healthcare because we're educated, right? This is our field. We do this every day, several times a day. We know what you should be doing. I had a boss that had a sign that said, "I'm not bossy. I just know what you should be doing." And nurses are notorious for that, right? We know what everybody should be doing. We don't practice it ourselves. How many healthcare professionals that work in end-of-life care actually have all their advanced care planning done? I don't. I don't have all mine done. But
I'm going to chastise you just right here on live TV.
Man, that's another podcast.
That's another podcast for us.
It is. I should not even claim that, but it's absolutely true. And
it's true.
It's another way of showing that I may work as a hospice nurse and I know how to do it right. And I know what your care should look like because I'm currently making the same mistakes, dragging my feet on the same topics that frighten me.
Well, sometimes it's easier to help somebody else rather than ourselves.
Oh, absolutely. Because self-awareness and introspection, they stink.
That's another one. Touche. Yes, do.
That was poetic. No, it's so much easier to look at someone else, especially when you're trained to guide them and support them.
Right.
And that's where I think the navigation services can be super helpful. This is what we're trained to do.
Very much so. It's it's that whole concept and the kind of the background I come from, information and referral. That trusted source, or who can you go to feel secure in knowing that the information that you're being given is authentic and trustworthy. And I think that's another component of what you're developing with Hospice Navigation Services, because I can envision the majority of the people that are going to be reaching out are going to be folks that are in a crisis.
Right. And that does happen, an acute traumatic event, health event, or an accident. And all of a sudden, you weren't even thinking about end-of-life care, and now you're forced into it.
You're forced into it, sure.
Which I think is just as overwhelming as having a lengthy caregiving experience where it snowballs and you're having to consider piece by piece what's going on. I think it's just as traumatic, just as difficult.
Well, we're continuing our delightful conversation with Helen Bauer, the host of the Heart of Hospice podcast. We're live on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. And Helen, I think I set it all up correctly this time. I don't know. My I don't have a teenager, but sometimes I want one just to set the technology up. But I certainly appreciate these open and honest conversations with you, because this is often a topic that people just avoid.
Right. And I'm so grateful to find somebody who's willing to step out in courage and just have those conversations with me.
And I know we've talked about this before, and I don't know, as I hope to retire someday, but I don't think I'll ever just retire. But I see working in hospice, I see me being a hospice volunteer.
Oh, absolutely.
I've always been drawn to it because of the experiences that I've had with it, and in sharing that knowledge. And I just think it's so important to give that comfort to people.
I think the perspective that you would bring, not just the heart of giving that someone as a volunteer brings, because hospice volunteers are the most generous people. They are the friends, they're companions, they're the confidants of our patients and their caregivers quite often. But I think for you as a volunteer to be able to say to a caregiver, I've stood exactly where you're standing right now.
I remember the lady that came in as the hospice volunteer. She almost said something like that verbatim.
Yes.
It was like I'd known her for years. Just kind of like after our first conversation. known her for
Exactly.
years. It's like,
I think there's a very special bond. It's
there is.
it creates, it's like the brotherhood in the military or among first responders, firefighters, and police. There
Right.
is a definite bond between people who have had a death experience, a grief
Right.
experience, and then especially in end of life care. I
Mhm.
know it is for the teams. End of life workers, they're my work family.
Very much so. So
Yes.
let's walk through how I hate using the word client. That's not really the right word, but
Well,
uh, how, if I was to access the Hospice Navigation Services, what's the process?
you'll be able to go online to theheartofhospice.com
Hmm.
when it goes live and book the kind of session that's appropriate for you. We're going to be offering a 30-minute complimentary session that contains a little bit of education and then time to have some Q&A with your navigator.
Okay.
That's done by phone with a single navigator. And then
Okay.
there'll be a level 1, a level 2, or a Q&A session based on your need. A Q&A session is for someone who's already in hospice or they're navigating um, a, a, a choice for hospice where they don't need the education. They're already
Right.
further ahead and don't need the education piece, but just want to have a Q&A, pick someone's brain, or troubleshoot a hospice experience that they're already having. Level 1 is for 1 to 2 people, same format. Level
Hmm.
2 is for 3 to 5 people. We'll be
Right.
doing the level 1 and level 2 either by phone or by video chat, whatever's comfortable for people. But that way you can have multiple caregivers on a level
Right.
2 call, a level 2 session. And again, it would be education that's a little more expanded, and of course, some time for Q&A, which is really important. I think people don't know what they don't know,
Right.
right, when you're starting out with this cold. So I think that's very important. We tried to make it accessible. You can do it by phone, you can do it by video over Zoom,
Hmm.
to create some warm connection. But um, just to be able to start out knowing you can have a little short 30-minute complimentary session, I think that's very valuable. So that's how
Very
the
valuable.
the,
Oh,
the sessions are structured.
right. Because not all hospices are the same.
True.
And here's an example, and something, was a learned experience. Um, the difference between curative and palliative care. One of the things that we went through, and I learned this in the process, is Richard was receiving radiation treatment. It was a palliative care treatment. One hospice wasn't uh, would not approve that type of service, but another hospice would. And I think that's something, as for somebody that's new, looking at these a variety of services, what's appropriate for your care partner and your care team.
Exactly. So we're not going to be providing any sort of referrals or recommendations.
Right.
What we're going to do, so for instance, if you had a situation like you and Richard were discussing, palliative radiation, some agencies can afford, because there's a cost associated with that, to take
Sure.
that on, others can't. So one of the components we're including in the navigation services is how to shop for a hospice, how to choose the one that's right for you. Do
Right.
you want a bigger hospice, or do you live in a rural area
Yeah.
where you have a small mom and pop nonprofit? So,
Uh,
but we won't be doing any
you're
clinical
not doing the
advising.
right.
No, no referrals. We'll teach you where to look.
That's the that was right to the point.
Exactly.
Yeah, and
Yes, we'll teach
that is
you.
what's so necessary.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's empowering in making your own choice. So
Mm-hmm.
the navigators that will be working with clients will never recommend a single agency.
Right.
We'll never recommend a service, but we will direct you. Here's a website where you can look at their statistics or their reviews or their star
Right.
ratings, that sort of thing.
That is spot on target for what people in crisis or people who have questions about the services that they're currently involved in. Where's that trusted resource? And you're developing it with the Hospice Navigation Services.
Well, we definitely want people to feel, I don't want to say that they're in control, but they are managing their own lives and their
Right.
own paths for what they're doing. It's all about the autonomy and empowerment.
Right. And that they can find a trusted resource, and knowing that that person on the other end of the line is an expert in this topic and can make them feel immediately comfortable, like you did the first day I talked to you.
That's a nice compliment. But yes, that's the
Yeah.
goal.
Yeah.
Absolutely. We want people to feel comfortable with us. I'm sure
Yeah.
there'll be some tears, but we have big shoulders.
We have
Hospice
big shoulders.
people, yeah, hospice people are
Hospice
used to
people have big
doing that.
shoulders.
Yeah.
So Helen, we just have a few more minutes left in our live broadcast. Why do these always have to end? I'm sure we're going to do more of these, but let our viewers know, because you're getting ready to launch, but you're not there yet. But there's information on the Heart of Hospice website, as well as your landing page on the Whole Care Network with your fantastic podcast. So to give a little bit more information about how people can find you and this wonderful service.
Theheartofhospice.com is the best place to connect with us. And of course, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, Twitter, and you can connect with me and the Heart of Hospice LLC on LinkedIn. So you can access the podcast in any of those places, and you can go directly to the Whole Care Network and find our landing page there as well. So it's easy to find us.
Yeah, and if you have any questions for Helen or myself, just send those to wecare@wholecarenetwork.com. That's wecare, wholecarenetwork.com, and we'll be happy to respond in a timely manner. And Helen, you are certainly a WC influencer. It is a delight to have you on
Always.
the show today.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you. We'll see you all